Hey, fellow mathers. Before we get into this episode, we want to share with you how you can get access to free content, professional learning that will keep your students engaged and doing the math that matters. Get ready to go to this link, mathisfigureoutable.com/challenge.
That's right. Registration is open for the free Math is Figureoutable Challenge that's starting May 15th and runs to the 17th at 7 p.m. Central. We're going to have 3 nights jam packed with learning and routines that you can take straight to your classroom.
In these challenges, we have a great time. We do some math, talk about classroom experiences, give away super cool bonuses and prizes. You won't just walk away with routines that are naturally engaging and encourage your students to think mathematically. You'll also have a chance to win over 6K worth in prizes, including a few virtual PD sessions for your school. I'll be joined by my wonderful co-host Kim and special guest Jenna Labe.
You can register at mathisfigureoutable.com/challenge for a fantastic learning experience. That's mathisfigureoutable.com/challenge. Now on to the show.
Hey, fellow mathematicians, welcome to the podcast where math is figure-outable. I'm Pam.
And I'm Kim.
You found a place where mathematics is not about memorizing and mimicking, where students are waiting to be told or shown what to do, but we're diving in and making sense of problems, noticing patterns, and reasoning using mathematical relationships. We can mentor students to think and reason like mathematicians were doing as they were growing. Not only are algorithms not particularly helpful in teaching mathematics, but rotely repeating steps actually keep students from being the mathematicians they can be. Hey, Kim.
Hey.
How's it going?
I didn't pick us a review today. I know everybody's sad to hear that, but we have a lot to say today, and it's kind of a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. So I didn't pick one. Anyway, I wanted to dive right in.
Yeah.
Listeners, today's episode has been on our minds for a while, lately for sure, but it's something that we have really, really firm feelings about. And so it comes up from time to time, and we just kind of look at each other and we know how we both feel. And it's, when we're in conversation with other people,
we kind of do that silent communication.
It can be tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, how much do we go into here? Do we dive in now? And to be clear, let's maybe start by saying this is a tricky conversation. It's not trivial. One thing we're not saying is then just go do it. Not at all. So yeah, thinking about my travels this fall, I've done a lot of traveling this last year. And one of the things that kept coming up is tracking. I think Canada calls it streaming. It's where we sort of sort students. I'll tell you, for instance. So I went to a brilliant school. I had a great time. It was a fantastic group of educators. In fact, it might have been the presentation that I did, the workshop I did this last year, where I got the most really good pushback. Like they were
loved that.
I loved it. They had such good questions. They were just, like, tell us more about this, and wait, how about this? And they had really good, how will that work with this? Like they were just trying to poke holes in all the things. And then they would smile big when I had an answer. Anyway, so they were really pushing back a lot. And in one of the breaks, where I was walking around, I was talking with the teachers, and one of the teachers said something, I can't remember exactly how it came up, but something about tracking. And the teacher said, well, when I taught science, I taught one year where I had all the kids, and it was a nightmare. And then we tracked the kids, and we had kind of this low class, this on-level class, and this extended class, or what do you call it? What do you call it? Sort of low, on-level. What's another word for the high class? The advanced accelerated. Yeah, one of those. And she goes, oh, then it was so much easier. And in that moment, I just kind of almost had to walk away, because what I was screaming in my head was easier for whom? Better for whom? She's like, it's so much better. It's so much easier. And I would just respectfully invite everyone to consider that I agree. It's probably easier for the teacher who teaches the on-level and the advanced class. I'm not sure it's easier for the teacher who teaches the quote unquote low class. But put all that aside, it's not better for the students.
For any of them.
And you might be like, "Oh, it's so much better for those high kids because they can just zoom along and get all this stuff
Ugh.
done." And Kim and I are gonna respectfully push back against that. And you might find it interesting that Kim and I were kind of in that. Like, we
Mhm,
were tracked. We were
mhm.
sort of in that higher group, where I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying we had the experience of, I don't know, kind of being what, shoved along into higher content without really understanding it. And I'm not saying that's the way that every accelerated class is, but we are now much more clear of what we missed because of that, what wasn't happening in those cases.
Hey,
Again,
I'm gonna interrupt you for just a
yeah,
second
yeah, yeah,
because a
please,
couple
please,
of
please.
times you said lower higher, and
I
that's
know,
the
and I'm
words that other
cringing every
people I
time I
know.
say it.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I just want to make it clear. Those are the words that people have been using.
Yes, so that's the reason I'm using them.
Okay.
Yeah, so however you have kind of described these situations where you've kind of tracked kids,
Yeah.
Kim and I are cringing the whole time that I'm saying, because we don't call kids or classes low. We don't call kids or classes high. We might say, "Oh, so you have tracked your kids into these things."
Yeah.
And then, boy, one of my favorite questions to ask right off the bat is, "How have you chosen who goes to those places?
Yes.
How have you
Yes.
made those decisions?"
Yes.
To be really clear, I taught at a school where, I boy, I just have so many I have so much in my head right now, so I don't know if this is the best place to start, but I will. I taught at a school where all of the students I got as, freshmen, as ninth graders, were not tracked. They were not streamed. So they came into me and I had them all. I will be really honest with you that I do think we had a pull-out special ed program at that point. So, I think I don't actually it was my beginning of my teaching career, so it was quite a while ago. Um, but I'm not sure about that because I definitely had 504s in my room. I had kids that had 504s were in the room. So I'm not exactly sure how much of that was happening, but I do know that we didn't have, this kind of lower level, higher level, whatever. And at the same time, in their eighth grade year, before I had them, there were not kids who were taking algebra, and some kids were taking on level, and some kids were taking that was not happening. All kids were taking eighth grade math, and then when I got them, all kids were taking ninth grade math. So I have taught in a situation where I had all the students in my classroom, and we were working hard at teaching algebra to these ninth grade kids. And Kim is laughing right now because she knows ninth grade is not my favorite grade. To all of you who like ninth graders, my hat is off to you. They're just too squirrely for me. I would actually rather, I think, teach eighth grade, though I never did. But I think I might rather teach eighth grade, or 10th and up. But somehow, I don't know. I mean, I can do it. I can do it. And I have a great time with them, but it's not my jam. So I have the experience of teaching in I have the experience as a student where I was tracked, and as a teacher where my kids were not tracked. And Kim, I think you have had some experience where you had
Mhm.
can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, I taught 3rd
Oh,
through
hey,
5th, and
hey,
so
before you do, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Let me just I said mentioned that Canada had streams. So lately, in some of the provinces in Canada, they have de-streamed their grade 9 math. So it would be similar to what I just described where I am. So we could have this sort of tracking name. We can have this kind of streaming name. Kim, you had to now. Please tell us about your experience.
Well, I taught 3rd through 5th grade, and so, that's typically not a tracked grade level, although it can be.
Hmm.
Gosh, where to start? When I there's so many classes. So my student teaching experience was in a tracked 4th grade classroom. And at the time, I didn't really know any better. And so when I got there, they said, "Hey, this is how math works." And all the kids stand up at the time and they all leave the room and switch around and do the thing. And she said to me, "You have the advanced class." And I was like, "Okay." And I don't know, like the first day, I was like, This is a little bit strange, but I didn't, it wasn't my choice. And over time, I got really uncomfortable just with the idea of the sort. And I think so from the very beginning, it didn't feel right. Even the behavior of get up, leave the classroom that's your home classroom and go somewhere else because you're not quote unquote good enough. Like
Mm.
I really, really struggled with that. And then when I was teaching, I don't even talk about the situations that we did for testing and stuff.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And they're very heavily tested math grades in Texas.
Hmm.
Um, and so there came a point in the year, I had my whole class for the whole year. And then often there would come a time in the year where state testing was coming. There's like 6 weeks before, or maybe 4 weeks before. And the practice in the school was to take all the students in the grade level and sort them, typically based on previous practice test scores. And we would sort them into groups. And if there were 6 classroom teachers, we'd pull them on a pile, and then we'd sort them into 6 classes, 6 groups.
Mhm.
So we'd have maybe one larger group of the kids who were expected to make commended the highest score. And all those kids went to a room and they got some sort of extension project, whatever. Then you might have,
Which kind of means you sort of left them alone. You're gonna get it. We know you are. Go,
and
go.
frankly, the least experienced teacher typically took them, or the one that like needed a break or whatever.
Because they're
Like,
not gonna mess them up.
or if we would like get a sub type person, right? Like, you guys are on your own, you're good to go. And it was just for a portion of our day and whatever. But anyway, and so then there was like the kind of next group, like you're maybe A or B expected, whatever, and on and on and on. And there were 2 groups, maybe 2 or 3 groups that were really the groups that were identified really heavily. One group was kind of the group of kids who had some difficulties. They were not expected to pass for whatever reason. And so that might have been called the low group. And they were clustered together. Maybe there was like 8 or 10 or 6, or I don't know.
Again,
And
we don't like that word low.
the whole thing is horrible. The whole
Yeah,
thing's horrible,
the whole
right?
thing's
This was 20 years ago and not the practice
So
anymore.
surely,
Thank
Kim,
goodness.
then that group, that's where you poured your best teachers
No,
and the most
no, no,
resources
no,
and
no, no. That was basically they're not going to pass, and so let's just put them together and we'll just do some sort of remediation. But there was always another class, or 2, typically 2, and that was for the bubble kids. And the bubble kids were,
Are you really calling them bubble kids?
that's what they were called. Not to their face, but they
Oh.
certainly knew it. I mean, kids know. So there were approximately, I don't know, like,
Why are you calling a bubble?
because they were on the cusp of passing, and
The high stakes test.
the high stakes test. And you might not, but you might if we give you a little extra support. And so there might have been like 2 groups, and the most talented teachers, the most experienced teachers, the teachers who volunteered, I don't even remember why they were chosen, were the ones who taught in those groups. You keep them kind of small, 6, 8. And so we might have had some years just one bubble group, I'm air quoting, and then like maybe some years we'd have 2, depending on the students. And those were the ones that got poured into the most because there was a prayer that they would pass. And like, I'm saying it really like kind of meanly and harshly, and I think people just didn't know. And maybe there are plenty of schools who still do that. And I'm not about saying that we shouldn't support students, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't help them zoom in on the few skills that might be useful. But the idea that we would then take a month of our time and sort kids to focus on the test is a whole other issue. But the sorting and then ignoring some kids while we focused on the other kids has still been a challenge for me to swallow, that I was a part of that.
Yeah.
That played along.
Well, and so we're not going to get too lost down this, but I do want to
Yeah.
acknowledge what you just said about like there is this pressure
Mhm.
to get kids to pass these
Mhm.
stupid high stakes tests. And probably if I had the podium to talk to the world, I would say to parents and people that are making the rules, the legislature and on high that are making all these sort of setting these standards, I would say the test does not do what you think it does.
Right.
Like you think that it ensures that kids all get a great education because you're making sure that teachers are there for, and it doesn't do that.
Right.
What it does is it creates scenarios like this where there's this incredible pressure on principals and on teachers
Mhm.
to get the kids to pass the test. And so they pour all their energy, they do these crazy, stupid things like
Right.
Kim's describing, where they do this segregation and they call it the camp and it's the fun thing. And it's like, we're going to rah, rah. But in reality, there are groups of kids that get ignored and groups of kids who get like pressured.
Right.
And
And really, sorry.
it's just not, it's not what we believe in for education.
And I think it comes from a belief that there are low kids and there are high kids. And so, and for whatever reason you sort them, you could sort them from like day one in a true tracking system. So for the idea of tracking, in my mind, comes from the belief that people have that there are low kids, there are medium kids, and there are high kids. And when you don't have that mindset, then tracking just screams like
What are you
ridiculous.
doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so maybe I'll tell a story now of, from my perspective. So I moved to a new school at one point, and as a new teacher, and so as a new teacher in a high school, I was teaching a lot of Algebra 1. It was kind of, I actually loved how that school set what teachers taught. Maybe we talk about this some other time. They did a good job of kind of, everybody taught something they wanted to teach, and everybody taught something that they didn't necessarily want to teach. So we kind of
Mhm.
all, I had some Algebra 1, but I also had a geometry class. Even though I was the new teacher on the block, they let me kind of teach one of the higher classes. Often we don't want to, I don't know, maybe I'm not the only one who doesn't want to teach freshmen. It was fine. And I enjoyed Algebra 1 anyway, blah, blah, blah. So for that reason, I'm teaching a lot of Algebra 1 and some geometry. And the way they didn't track, this is the same school that did not track through ninth grade, but then they did. So then at that point they said, and I don't, well, I'll just stay there. So then they said, let's decide who's going to take Algebra 2 next year. So Pam, they handed me a list of all the students that I had in Algebra 1, and they said, who is capable of taking Algebra 2 and being successful next year. So I want to just stop here for a second and say, one of the things that Kim and I are going to gently push on is, how are you choosing who gets to go into whatever, place that however you're tracking, how are you choosing? Or is it teacher recommendation? Is it a test that only tests memory and fake math? Is it, are there, like, can we all admit that the system for choosing who goes into those tracks could be flawed, could have some problems with it? So the way that we did it in this particular school is we looked at grades that could influence, but the general biggest thing was teacher recommendation. Well, I actually like that if we've got teachers with a real math perspective. If teachers really understand real math and are teaching real math, then I think teacher recommendation could be a fine thing that could at least influence what classes kids could take the next year. So the teachers came to me and said, this is how you do it. We know you're new here, so go look down this list and choose only the students who will be successful in Algebra 2 next year. Just for those of you that teach high school, kids from Algebra 1, if they wanted to, could take Algebra 2 the next year. They would double up. They would take geometry and Algebra 2. That was
Mhm.
kind of how kids got from that ninth grade algebra into calculus if they wanted to double up.
Mhm.
So my job was to say, could a kid be successful in Algebra 2? And so I went down and I marked all the kids I thought who could be successful in Algebra 2, which were almost all of the students that I had, because they could be successful in taking Algebra 2. The teachers in charge came back to me and they said, oh, hey, you must have misunderstood. Like, there's way more students in Algebra 2 than we've ever had before. So, we'll tell you again, we know you're new here. Only the students who can be successful in Algebra 2 should now I'm actually giving them a little more credit than I might should, because at that time they literally said only the good enough kids. Like, the
Mm.
language was a little,
Mm.
I'm kind of being nice about their language. It's only the
Mhm.
high kids. Like, we don't want any low kids, just only the high kids. And so I said in that moment, when you're like, oh, maybe you didn't understand, only those. And so I said, sure. So sorry, I misunderstood, though I hadn't. Let me look at that list again. And in front of them, I looked down that list and I did not change a student recommendation. And I handed it back to them and I said, nope, these guys are good. They're good. Yeah, they will be successful in Algebra 2. They glared at me. They were like, no, really, we only want kids we only want the good kids. We only want the smart kids in
Mhm.
Algebra 2. And I said, these kids can be successful. And they said, I don't want them. And I said, give them to me. I will take them. And then they kind of glared at me because they're like, we're not giving you Algebra 2 next year. And I was like, I'm telling you right now, this many kids can be successful in Algebra 2. And I stuck to my guns. And so it was honestly not my intent, but I did then get sections of Algebra 2 the next year. And they started filtered out where every kid, not filtered, that's not the right word I meant. They started, all the kids were evenly distributed among the 3 or 4 of us that taught Algebra 2. And within days and a few weeks, I started getting kids transferring into my sections. And those other teachers were like, you recommended this kid. They can't do it. They're yours. And I said, bring them on. Give them to me. I'll take them. You bet. And those kids, by Jove, were successful in Algebra 2 because I was teaching at least the real math as much. Still back then, I was still learning a whole lot of it. But I had a belief that kids can. Like we can actually, anyways, I'm getting excited here. So there's a story from my, and it went on. Kim, the next year, at the end of that year, they said, okay, same thing, but not the end when the kids are registering. Same thing. All right. From your kids in Algebra 2, tell us which kids can go on to be successful in pre-calculus. And I said, oh yeah, yeah. And they glared at me and I was like, yeah, no problem. Don't worry. I'll do it. I'll do it really well. And our pre-calculus enrollment doubled.
Yeah.
And the next year, our calculus enrollment doubled. Those kids can.
Yeah,
kids can. They absolutely. Now this gets a little sticky because I will say, is there such thing as cognitive ability? Yes. Do some kids have more cognitive ability than others? Yes, but we all can do more real math than we can fake math. Everyone can do more real math than fake math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about our kids for a second?
Yeah. Yeah. You want to start that?
So
our personal kids.
Personal kids. My oldest was in 6th grade. And he was, it was the first time they had the advanced track. So elementary school at their school was not tracked in any way. 6th grade, you take advanced or not. Luke enjoys math. And so he opted to take the advanced class. And towards the end of his 8th grade class. So the way they do it at the school here is you take 6th grade and half of 7th grade in the 6th grade class. And then in 7th grade advanced, you do half of 7th grade and 8th grade so that you can take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. I think that might be fairly traditional for advanced tracks. So
there are a lot of people that do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So towards the end of his 6th grade year, I got a call from somebody, counselor, I don't know, AP, whatever. And they said, hey, so we think that there's this handful of 5 kids. I don't remember the exact number, 4, 5, 6. And we think that they can skip 7th grade and take Algebra 1 in 7th grade.
Just skip it. Just flat out.
Just skip it. But what you have to do is you have to take a test, basically. The 8th grade end of course test. You need to take the 8th grade end of course test to prove that you know enough to take the Algebra 1 class. And I was like, what does that mean? And all the questions. And I remember calling you. Do you remember me calling you?
I do.
And I was like,
we had some conversations about tracking. We felt about it.
Well, yeah. And I'm not a
now
fan.
you as a parent, this is the first time you as a parent kind of are faced with this situation. Yeah.
And so, I like hemmed and hawed, and I was really struggling because Luke enjoys math and, anyway, so I said, let's have him take the test and just see what happens. So he took the test. Oh, actually, I'm forgetting the best part of the story. So they took the test, and then parents found out about it. And then when parents found out, and, of course their argument was, why are you hand choosing these 5 kids?
Hand choosing who got to take the test.
Who got to take the test.
Yeah. It wasn't a test for everybody. It was like, we think
they were handpicked. Yep.
Yeah.
And
picking so then on why not my kid?
Yeah, for sure. And so then they, a lot of people were like, everybody should get to take the test. So then it became everybody in the grade level took the test. Everybody in the advanced track took the test. And I think that kind of backfired a little bit too, because then parents didn't know about it. And they were like, wait, my kid has to take this test. And you're telling me about the class. It was just kind of an unfortunate situation. But in the end, I think there was maybe, oh, that's not true. They sorted again. But as it turns out, the 5 kids that were originally picked were the 5 that did well on the 8th grade end of course. So those are the ones. Anyway, and so I hemmed and hawed for a long time.
We would agree, though, just before you leave this, that if they're going to give some kind of opportunity, they should have given it to all the kids.
Yes, absolutely.
The unfortunate part was that they didn't communicate well, and it was kind of that was hard.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so then I was struggling because I thought, do I let him? Do I see value, obviously, in him being with peers? Because the way it was going to work is he was just going to go do his own thing and whatever. And he was with this cluster of kids, but they did stuff kind of online. Anyway, I struggled a lot because I thought, if they're going to offer this, then I would like for him to take advantage of what's offered. And frankly, I had some reservations about what the math was going to, it was going to be very traditional. The class that he was going to be was very, very traditional. And if he was going to do something kind of on his own path, then it wasn't going to be as traditional. So that was appealing. Anyway, long story short, I struggled. We let him do it.
Well, let me say one more other thing, if I may, that you struggled with. As soon as they decide
Yep.
to track,
Yep.
so they've pulled his best friends, his 4 best friends are now going to do this thing. You now have almost a social consideration as well, because now he's not only has this opportunity to do, maybe. Let me just say it again. I think what I heard you said is if he stayed in the kind of regular track, whatever,
Well,
then
the path he was supposed to be on,
the path he was
would
going
have
to
been
be
very
on
traditional.
would have been super traditional. And
And so
you had
he was,
hopes that maybe if he did the other one, he actually could learn more math because it would be less memorization, less like
well,
he could.
because he was going to have the opportunity to do stuff kind of on his own. And he's the type of kid who will study and like not
And
study
dive
like
in and
homework,
look
but
and
he would, yes, he would
yeah.
make sure that he'd ask questions, we would talk about it. And so
But you're clear that's good for him in math. It wasn't so good for him socially, right? So
absolutely,
like
he
all these
no
different.
conversations, no differences, no, so it was a big struggle. But where it landed was they offered it.
And if you had kept him in the way he was supposed to go, his four
Well, I don't think they,
comrades,
yeah.
would be out of the. And I think that's one of the things that parents face. So go ahead. I should have let you finish your sentence. Sorry.
Well, they weren't necessarily friends, but they were kids in his class who were offered that as well. And because it was offered, I think parents often say, I mean, if you're offering to advance my kid, I want in on that.
Yeah. Like, why would you ever not have your kid do the sort of
Yeah.
advanced thing?
And if the situation would have been that he was going to get the kind of math that I feel strongly about, then advanced or not, that wouldn't have been something we had chosen. And so, it's definitely a struggle because I don't believe in tracking, but then there's my kid, doing the thing. So,
And so I think part of our point in this podcast is those of you out there who have any kind of influence or you're making any kind of say about tracking, we would invite you to consider the position that you put parents in.
yes.
Because often I will hear teachers complain, "Oh, I can't believe these parents, they just want to socially promote their kid. Like, we have this track and they just want their kid in there because it's the place to be." To which I say, "Yeah, because you created it. Like, you've created a situation where they don't want their kid to be left behind.
Hmm.
And you've also created a situation where especially depending on how you are sorting the kids, where you're creating a place where the more compliant kids are in one track and the less compliant kids are in the quote unquote lower track. And so now you've got parents who are like, I don't want my kid in with those kids.
Hmm.
Like those kids they're not college bound. They're not really, and whatever words they put to it, they're not as compliant. That looks less safe. It looks less like my kid's going to have advantages and safety and
Hmm. More
and
opportunities.
more opportunities. And also, so my particular kid was in the situation. So my daughter, it was at the same place where our kids are in the same district, where from 5th to 6th grade, they were doing this tracky thing. And she did. So it's not the one you were talking about, because that was the year after, right? Because your son, 6th grade, did the advanced track, and then
Yep.
they were doing yeah.
Yep.
So when they were saying, hey, all the 5th grade kids, we're going to give you this test, and you're going to either test in or out of the track in 6th grade, my daughter didn't pass the test. Hope you don't mind me
Oh,
saying
see,
that.
we didn't even do that. You just got to choose. The teachers had to kind of recommend,
Oh, that's interesting.
but like,
Okay.
guess how many kids are in the advanced track when you get to choose? A ton.
Well, of course, because parents are
Because
going
why
to
would you? Yeah.
choose for
Yeah.
yeah. Why would you ever say, nah, go ahead and leave my kid in the low group? Like what? Anyway, so my Abby had to take test. I think it
Okay.
was actually just the state high stakes test scores that they looked at. Anyway, whatever it was, she didn't meet it. Well,
Hmm.
my daughter's brilliant.
Yeah.
She can math with the best of them.
Yep.
She has dyslexia, and so sometimes tests are a little tricky.
Sure.
For whatever it was, for whatever reason, she didn't quite meet whatever the standard was. So I went to the principal, who I know well, and I said, "Hey, like, I understand you have this arbitrary rule about this cutoff, about kids, whatever, whatever, but you have put me as a parent in the place where, because of the way you're sorting, you've got kids that are, how do I say, parents are more involved. They're sort of on a college track. They're the kids who are following the rules, where you've now sorted everybody into that group, and kids where parents are less involved and they're less interested in following the rules, and the math is going to go much slower, and it'll drive my daughter crazy because it's going to
Well,
go that much slower."
often because the reasons for sorting are not deeply mathematical.
No, because it's so much based on fake math.
Right.
So much based on. So in that instance, I said, "You have put me as a parent in a place where I'm saying to you right now, put my kid in that higher track, because
Mhm.
I know what the way you've just done this is not smart. And I don't want my kid in that quote unquote lower track." And she smiled and said, "Fine." I mean, she knew me well enough that she didn't want to have the battle. And so Abby went into the higher track and soared. Like, she was more than successful. She would have been successful everywhere we put her, because she's that kind of person. But the point here is, you put parents in an extremely difficult position. So stop doing it. Like, now I make it sound like it's trivial.
Mhm.
The other thing we cannot do is, we can't do it on a dime. You can't just say, "Oh, okay, we've never done this before. Let's just instantly have teachers teach all the kids." I
Mhm.
believe that science teacher that I talked to at that one school, that it is harder to teach all the kids. Sure, it's easier when you have a group of compliant kids. Have you ever taught the group of the kids that got sorted out in the stupid way that are less compliant?
Mhm.
I mean, that's a pretty difficult place to be, for all the reasons. So it's not trivial. Kim and I were just in a really nice session at NCSM, where there were two districts that were talking about some changes they've been making over years. And they're in a really nice place where teachers have been well trained and they know how to differentiate naturally, and they can work with different learners, and they because they are mathing in a better way, it all works better.
Yeah.
So we're not suggesting that you turn on a dime, but we wanted to have an episode where we raise the idea that if it was up to Kim and me, we would not track. We would train teachers, help teachers, build them to be able to really math with all kids,
Right.
help them learn how to differentiate, and that and let's just be really clear that having all kids in a classroom works so much better when we're teaching real math.
Yeah.
We would
Yeah.
agree that if your school district, your teachers, your colleagues are stuck in fake math, yeah, it's good. That would be a much harder ask.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think I think what we would always suggest is, let's help teachers know their content and know their kids so well that they can appreciate the different perspectives, and they can appreciate the different ways that kids approach problems, so that there's connections being made, and not just, here's the one right way, and if you can't follow along, there's something wrong with you. Not we need to change what's happening in the classroom.
yeah, yeah. So Kim, I'd like to end on a story that I have been thinking about a lot. So we do these challenges at least 3 times a year. We get on; it's totally free. We teach all the things. It's super fun. We often will have special guests. At one point, we had a special guest that was my son.
Yeah.
So my son was in a scenario all through fifth grade, similar to what we just talked about, where it was similar to what we've talked about, in that when he was going into sixth grade, they were going to track kids.
Hmm.
But what was really unique was, because he was my third, I had already been working with all the teachers at your school, his school
Hmm.
that you taught at, for a while. And we were really getting some good mathing, and he had the best teachers, uh, AKA he had Kim,
Hmm.
and Monica Hettenhausen, you were amazing. And some other really, Sarah Hempel, and who am I forgetting?
I don't know.
Stephanie Lugo. Yeah, I don't mean to forget. It was excellent. I mean, he had amazing teachers.
Yeah, for sure.
And because of that, he was in this place where all kids were learning, and all kids. Anyway, so here's what he said. he said, we said, hey, what, blah, blah, blah. He did some things on the challenge. And then he goes, hey, I wonder if you teachers, if you might find this interesting. When he said that, I was like, oh, I hope this is going to be good. I had no idea what he was going to say. And he said, I
Everything
wonder.
Craig says is good.
Yeah, he's so good. He said, I wonder if you'd find it interesting. And I've never heard him say this before. He said, when I was in grade school, we were all learners and I was in a classroom. He said, I was aware that I was a little quicker than some kids, but it didn't really matter because the way we were doing things, we were all learning from each other. And I was aware that we were all learning and I could learn from all of my classmates. And then we had this weird split. And all of a sudden there were smart kids and dumb kids, and there were high kids and low kids. And we knew it. And he's like, it was
Yep.
really weird because I had been in a place where I was really clear, I can learn from you. But then this artificial split put us in this place where kids all of a sudden treated me different. And they were like, no, you're like smart and I'm dumb. And nothing was that explicit, right? But it was this place where he goes, it was really unfortunate because I would look at my classmates and I would go, no, like wow, that's so unfortunate that now you think you're less than when I know better. Huh. And as a kid, he knew that. Every person on the challenge just had their jaw open. Like, it's just like, whoa, so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. He was so clear that we all can math,
Yeah.
but then they were now in a system that says not all can.
Yeah. So I guess if there's a takeaway from today, we've told some stories and things about, kind of what we believe it's about tracking, and maybe we've raised some wonders and thoughts for teachers. But I think the most important message is that Craig had been told for years that all kids could, and he was super clear on that. And I think that's a great message that he got over the years. And then he moved on. And there was a system that he was put in where students were sorted, and it was basically sorted into kids who could and kids who couldn't. And I love that it bothered him because it should have. So teachers, we hope that you are also creating an environment where all kids can and everyone knows it. And if your students are moving on to a tracking system, let them know that it does not mean that some students are better and some are not. I hope your students have the same uncomfortable feeling that Craig had. They should.
Nicely said. Y'all, we know it's not trivial. We appreciate you listening to our stories today. And hopefully we've just given you some ideas to start working on as we all make math more figure-outable for all. Thank you for tuning in and teaching more and more real math. To find out more about the Math is Figure-Outable movement, visit mathisfigureoutable.com. Let's keep spreading the word that math is figure-outable. Thank you for listening and making math more figure-outable.
To learn even more, make sure you register for our free challenge at mathisfigureoutable.com/challenge. You are not going to want to miss the evenings of May 15th through 17th, starting at 7 p.m. Central.
Math teaching, go register now. That's mathisfigureoutable.com/challenge. Join us to make math more and more figure-outable. And if you can't join live, register and we'll send you access to the recordings. We'll see you there.